I love it. I love it. It's a good sign when you want to talk, so that's a good thing. Well, welcome this morning. We start a new series really called Practicing the Way. And we have, for the last several weeks, been in a series called In the Way. It was kind of a double meaning what's in the way from us being in the way. The way was the New Testament phrase of following Jesus. In fact, in John Mark Comer's book, Practicing the Way, that we are all kind of working through together, the word Christian is used a few times in the New Testament. It was really about being disciples and following in the way of Jesus. And we've done, I think, some damage to the word Christian probably in America. We've definitely politicized it. It's become more of a weapon at times to harm and hurt other people. And so we're going to be using the word disciple quite a bit and following Jesus, more appropriate to what the New Testament and Jesus himself would use. We want to talk about what does it mean to practice in the way. What does that look like? So the question I have for you this morning is, who are you becoming? We're all becoming something. We're all on a journey, whatever that means for you, but you are moving towards a who that's going to be in the future. And you have to ask yourself that question because we go daily through our habits and the things that we do that occupy our time and energy, and that becomes a week and weeks, and that becomes months, and it becomes years. And some people show up to themselves later on in life and go, what happened? This is not who I wanted to become. I think that's the question we have this morning for us as we start to talk about practicing the way. Now, I think this message, Tricia usually asks me, how do you feel about the message? And, sometimes I feel good, sometimes I don't. This is like, huh? And it doesn't mean it's not studied. It's just pretty simple. Yet, in its simplicity, it's very difficult. Now, this morning, I want it to be, obviously, like an invitation. I'm going to say some things about what it means to follow Jesus. And I by no means am pointing a finger at any of us. I'm more making a statement about how hard it is to follow Jesus. But I want you to know toward the end of this that he invites us to follow him, and there's beauty in it. And I want you to feel that calling in your own life. A latest Pew Research poll showed that 68% of our country says they're Christian. I heard some laughs. Why? Why would we laugh about that? Because we would all say, well, are they really living that life? Because really, if over half our country were really living out the things of Jesus, we would be a radically different place. Agreed? So a follow-up study was only 4% of those people are actually following and practicing in the things of Jesus. What we've done in our country is made it really easy to be associated with the idea of Jesus. I go to church, I do certain things, or I call myself a Christian, but not live out or follow through in what it means to be a disciple and a follower of Jesus. You see, in the scriptures, it's very clear there's a difference between someone who says and associates with versus someone who lives out and is becoming like Jesus. In C.S. Lewis's book, The Screwtape Letters, we've used this before. It's just a fictional, it's kind of an idea about what it would be like for two demons to be dialoguing about distracting a Christian and people not to follow Jesus. And there's a paragraph in there that I think is quite fascinating. It says, let them convert. These are two demons talking, saying, let them convert to Christianity. Let them keep their habits, distinctively Christian habits, of course. Let them preserve them unconsciously and let them be transferred to the ordinary movements of the body, which may have no real bearing on their faith. How many times are people in our country, 68%, doing things that are just Christian habits, but are not transforming their lives? They're not really following Jesus. You see, somehow in our brains we've figured out a way, and maybe it's our worldview, how do we go to church, do the things that we think are Christian, try not to do the things that aren't Christian, and it's more just an association rather than it is actually entering into a relationship that's following Jesus. And this is quite frankly why I think a lot of the church struggles today in our country, because the idea of just being Christian is so, in some ways, it's hurtful, it's created hate, it's not the way of Jesus. And so for terms, I'm going to kind of move away from the word Christian, not saying it's bad, it's only used a couple times in the New Testament, more about what does it mean to follow Jesus? What does it mean to be a disciple? This is what we're called to be. You see, you can't become a Christian and say you're not a disciple. You're all a disciple. And let's put it this way, we're all being discipled by something. It's what you're spending your time and energy letting pour into your life, or what you're dedicating yourself to. So we want to talk about that this morning and try to get at some of the core, what that is. So to be like is very different than to know about, and I hopefully this morning am going to move past just knowing some things about Jesus. That we're not simply here just to learn more things about Jesus, because friends, that is a small part of following Jesus. The disciples themselves were very, I wouldn't say, they were intellectually ignorant on a lot of the things of Jesus. They only find out and discover later on in life about the things of Jesus. They weren't the great teachers until later on in their life. What does that mean? I think we work to just know all the right things about God, but I'm going to call us to this morning, it's more about us following to be like Jesus and putting practices in our life that allow us to be changed. So what does following Jesus demand for us? And I'm going to give you some points here. And again, some of these verses are going to be review, and they keep saying, follow me. In fact, that phrase, if you just looked up in Bible Gateway, a Bible program, and said, all the times that follow me shows up, it's dozens and dozens and dozens of times. Why? Because it is the calling that we have to follow Jesus. So I'm only going to put a few of these verses up. There's boatloads in the scriptures, but I just think to get us started this morning, to dive in and just talk about, it's a simple verse, but it calls for quite a bit. Jesus, Matthew 4:19, the very beginning of his ministry, says, come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you out to fish for people. I will send you out to fish for people. I'll make you fishers of men. I think one of the things we have to realize is that Jesus wants us to follow him so that we become like Jesus, so that when we have the chance, we get sent out to actually begin to call other people to follow Jesus. Part of the struggle, I think, too, in the church today is that we wait for a church staff or church elders or super volunteers or what we think are spiritual people to do all of this, and that isn't the master strategy that Jesus died for. He said that you all become the priesthood of believers. You are all the ambassadors. I just spoke this Easter to our church of African friends that have left refugee camps. And the first thing I said to them is, you are no longer refugees. You are not refugees. We are all ambassadors. You've been sent here by God. That's a different framework for us to think about, and that we've been sent and put in the places that we work at and we go to school at and the neighborhoods we live in to actually be people that are fishing for other people as we're following Jesus. And you don't have to know all the answers. It's living like Jesus that's attractive, not just talking about him. And that's one of the, I think, the damaging things that we've done to one another. We keep talking about the right answer. You believe incorrectly. You should do this. You should stop doing this. When really it's about us modeling this beautiful picture of what it means to love Jesus. So the thing that first it demands of us, really, I think, about following Jesus is we're all to become like him. That's the demand. We're not to become like anyone else other than Jesus, and following him means really looking into and studying what does it mean to follow Jesus, and that's What we want to do in the next several weeks is we get you into these groups. We'll talk a bit more about that. Matthew 8:22 then starts to take us down a road of how costly following Jesus could be. But Jesus told him, as he's talking to one gentleman in Matthew 8, let the dead bury their own dead. Anybody read this before? It's a shocking comment. It's like, well, wait a second, Jesus doesn't believe in grieving or doing funerals? Not at all. That's not the point. We'll get into this in a second. Let me show you this next verse. Mark 10:21. Jesus looked at him. It's the rich young ruler who says, what does it mean for me to get into heaven? What are the things I need to do? Jesus looks at him and says, one thing you lack. Go sell everything you have, give to the poor, and you will have a treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. Okay, so these two statements are very similar, even though they seem like they're very different. Jesus isn't opposed to this man having wealth, not at all. What he's saying is, it's in the way of you following in the way. It's the very thing that you have as a higher priority than actually following me. When he says, let the dead bury the dead, he's not saying don't go to funerals anymore, let people lie around on top of the ground, which sounds disturbing. Sorry, I just said that out loud. He's saying there are traditions and things that are not as important as following Jesus. And that really is the cost here. To follow Jesus, what it costs us, what it demands of us, we have to leave everything. You may not have to actually leave it. I don't think the scripture is saying sell everything, but every one of us in this room knows something that we hold on to as a higher priority than to follow Jesus and practice that life of loving God and others well. What is it? Could be your reputation. Could be your own financial security. I don't know what it is for you. I know that you've got to be able to leave everything else. You just heard JT talk about it in his story, because we all have stories where I think we're called to a space of saying, I have to trust him and have that as the highest priority. You have to be able to leave everything in your own heart and soul. If you're not willing to, then following Jesus is going to be a distorted kind of idea of you looking spiritual. Matthew 16:24, then Jesus says to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. This phrase again comes up often in Jesus talking to his disciples. Luke 9, it says it again. Then he said to them, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. In every instance that Jesus is saying this, guess what hasn't happened yet? You know, he hasn't been crucified. This has to be a bit of a shocker for his disciples. Wait a second, take up your cross. You mean that horrible Roman torturous way to die, where they have to carry their cross through the town and they actually have to be humiliated and actually be on a cross? The word picture that Jesus is painting here had to be shocking to them. Wow, take up your cross. What does that mean? You got to be willing to carry and do the hard work. Now, I want to talk about this for a moment. You have to be willing to do the hard work. I find most of us in this world, in this time and age, have very difficult times sitting in what I call unpleasant emotions. Sad, lonely, afraid, angry. Actually, anger is easier to sit in. Hurt. There's these set of unpleasant emotions, and what we like to do is get out of that. Wait, this can't be God, or this can't be right. I need to leave out of this hard work. And I think most of the character development that God is doing in our lives is in the harder spaces. It's in hard work. Are you willing to be held accountable? Are you willing to sit with someone and let them tell you what they see? and you not defend it, but hear it, and maybe work on it, maybe be honest about it. This is this hard work, and I think taking up your cross means not fighting for your rights, not fighting for your own posture and position, and bearing the weight and responsibility of what it means to be a servant and someone who humbles themselves and doesn't try to have it all figured out and right. You got to learn how to do the hard work. I think these verses are enough for me this morning. We could bring the guys back up and go, let's just finish here. Follow me, take up your cross. Wow. Take up your cross. In 1983, many of you know I was in the Marine Corps, and so I was driving in a bus down to MCRD, the U.S. Marine Corps boot camp depot, and they make you cross a line, and you cross this line and you swear in, but then they strip you of everything. They remove everything from you. They take hair. I did have hair. Clothes, everything. They take away the identity, and for 3 months, they make you do hard work. And I wonder if it's a good metaphor for us to think about, is this life about finding pleasure or finding the end or arriving, or is it about the hard work? And I think we've got to do the hard work. And hard work is hard. I don't think it's easy. I think I have to sit in that and be held accountable, or hear that I hurt somebody, or hear that things aren't right. Somehow we have to be able to do the hard work. And I wonder how many Christians today actually are willing to do that. We don't like hard work. We don't like to have the pressure. John 13:15, I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. I have set you an example. A pretty big example. 1 Peter 2:21, a favorite verse. To this you are called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. Both of these verses are saying, I've left you a template. I've called you by name to follow in this path. Actually, follow in his steps literally means the footsteps of Jesus. When you follow a rabbi, you would follow them for years, talking like they talked, walking like they walked, everything. And so following and practicing the way of Jesus is, knowing about Jesus is great as long as you're trying to follow in those footsteps. Wow, he forgave everyone. I need to do that. Wow, he served. Lord, help me do that. And you're following in steps. It's not simply knowing about him, it's actually picking up your feet and your life and is flowing and moving towards being more like him. James talks about this, the half-brother of Jesus. He says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. Finish its work. In order for is it a clam or an oyster that creates a pearl, that there has to be sand and there's irritation in that, and it takes a long period of time for that irritation to actually form the pearl. Finishing the work is an interesting phrase, and I think it gets us into this. We've got to be able to sit, not only do the hard work, but sit in the hard stuff. And that means sometimes staying without leaving hard times or hard places. I think sometimes when we have difficult in America, we don't feel like, we don't deserve this. I'm out. I'm out of this job. I leave this church. I leave this family. I leave this person. And we bail on maybe sitting in the hard stuff and letting it finish its work. Again, most of us get formed, most of our character development and most of the great things about how God's shaping us comes out of hard spaces. I mean, again, you heard JT saying, I wrote this song, you get the glory from this, is from what? A hard space, a hard time. Why is it that we try to leave those things? And so part of following Jesus means not just taking up the cross and doing the hard work, but actually staying and letting it finish its work, staying in those spaces. John 10:27, I love this, is my sheep listen to my voice, and I know them and they follow me. We talked about that all last series. The other voices that try to confuse, but knowing a voice means you actually have to know that person. When you start to understand and hear a voice in someone's life, there's probably relationship, and that's really what it's calling us to, is not just to know things about Jesus, not just do things and follow Jesus, but have a relationship with him. Develop relationship. Faith in Jesus Christ was never about punching a card, about just attending church, just giving, doing all these things so we look the part. It's actually about knowing him. And as any of you in this room know, if you've had a relationship for any certain amount of time and it has any depth, relationships are hard. They take work. They take energy. They take commitment. It takes practicing. Jesus starts the Beatitudes, or his Sermon on the Mount. He calls these disciples in the very beginning, and at the end of it, he'll say, follow me, practice the things I'm telling you to practice. And then he puts this at the very end of a Sermon on the Mount. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew, beat against that house, and yet it did not fall, but because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who builds his house on the sand. The tough times came, the tough situations came, the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. You've got to daily give yourself to practicing the way. This is not a Sunday thing. Now listen, I want to give some credibility about being a part of a local body. Could be another one that you're deciding to be a part of, but part of the beauty of a church culture and body is that you didn't pick each other. We didn't. And some of you may struggle like with different personalities, but like me, you may struggle with me. But maybe I'm in your life to be the sand, right, in your shell, an irritation, helping you learn how to have patience with someone so stubborn like myself, right? Yes. You didn't have to say that so loud. Someone said yes. But get my point. We need each other in this practicing the way. I don't even know JT. I loved hearing his story. It's an encouragement to me. How can we be that more open and honest and journeying together in our relationship following Jesus? That's why I love reading the Gospels about the disciples. They were fighting. We don't know a lot of what happened in between the gaps of Scripture, but we can only guess that they weren't always getting along, and there was friction, and there was tension. And isn't that the beautiful part of becoming Christ followers, of following Jesus and learning what it means to be learning together in community? John Mark Comer, in his book, Practicing the Way, says the way is a journey, not a destination. It's about continuous improvement and growth, practicing every day. This is the beauty of being part of a local body. We are trying to be like Jesus. Who are we becoming? I hope more like Jesus. I know I fail and falter. I know you do too. But are we becoming more like him? Who are you following this morning? You're following someone. Before we go to communion and before the guys come up to lead us in that time of response, I'm going to show you a clip from the Chosen, and it's where Jesus is going to call Peter. And Peter's had kind of a go. If you've watched The Chosen or read before, he's not necessarily buying into the Jesus thing yet. He's got to make a living fishing, and he's had a really bad evening. And there's this moment at which Jesus does a miracle, and he's got to drop stuff. He's got to leave stuff, and he's got to make a decision. I want you to sit back and watch this as we then respond at the crosses.
Simon, it's him.
Excuse me.
That's him, Simon, that's him.
No time for this, Andrew.
It's him, Simon, it's the man. John said he's here, right now.
May I ask a favor? I'm teaching these people, and apparently they're having trouble hearing me. If I could stand on your boat, that would be helpful.
They're having trouble hearing you, huh?
Yes, of course. Please, stand on our boat. Thank you.
I need to go. I'm sorry. No time for this today.
Stay a few moments longer. I have something for you.
For me.
It's two simple words that I think are an invitation, and yet the hardest two words you'll probably ever have to follow in your entire life, to follow Him. And yet I think in our culture in America, we let a lot of things become a higher priority. And I just thought for us to go to the crosses and to enter into communion. Again, we don't do communion for God. It's already done for us. And we get to enter into that space and remember why He died. And He didn't die, friends, so that we just sit on church on Sunday. He died that we'd be followers of Jesus and then fish for men. Fish for others. Serve others. Love others. So I just thought for this morning, you have a piece of paper under your chair, on the tables there's a pen. Maybe you write down, what's the one thing that's maybe been taken more of your time, more of your energy, more of your focus. And maybe you write that down, and just as you crumble it up, you drop it at the cross. Peter had to drop his net. Sure, he got fish, but he left that boat and he followed Jesus. And I think that's the call for us this morning. As we're led in worship, will you consider following Jesus? God in heaven, we're grateful for what you have offered us in your Son, Jesus. God, might we learn what it means to practice in the way to follow Him. In Jesus' name, amen.